"I want the fat one," Mountain Man declared at the bride auction. What he did next shocked. The Red Dog Saloon in Timber Ridge reeked of stale beer, tobacco smoke, and desperation on that muggy August evening in 1879. The regular crowd of miners, drifters, and ranch hands had been drinking since noon, and by the time Silas Thorne mounted the makeshift stage at 8 o'clock, they were primed for entertainment, no matter how cruel that entertainment might be. "Gentlemen," Thorne called out, with the practiced enthusiasm of a man who'd run more than a few questionable enterprises. "Tonight, we have a special opportunity. 5 unfortunate ladies seeking matrimony, and 5 chances for you lucky bachelors to acquire wives. Starting bid is $20, and the highest bidder takes home the lady of his choice." The unfortunate ladies stood on the stage in a miserable line, 4 thin, worn-looking women who'd clearly fallen on hard times, and 19-year-old Eleanor Ellie Vance, whose substantial 400-pound frame made her an immediate target for the crowd's cruelty. Ellie had a soft, round face that might have been pretty if it weren't so often twisted with shame and fear. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her brown eyes were already glistening with tears as the crowd's reaction made it clear what they thought of her presence on that stage. "Look at that one!" someone shouted, pointing at Ellie. "She's big as a barn." "Who'd pay $20 for that? More like she should pay us to take her. I bet she eats $20 worth of food in a week." The mockery escalated, each man trying to outdo the previous one's cruelty. Ellie kept her eyes downcast, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, willing herself not to cry, not to give them the satisfaction. She'd known this would be terrible, had known she'd be mocked and rejected, but desperation had driven her here anyway. Her family had died in a typhoid outbreak, leaving her with no money and no prospects. The bride auction had seemed like her only chance to escape the charity house where she'd been living, enduring constant abuse from the matron who considered her a worthless burden. "Bidding starts at $20, Thorne announced, gesturing to the first woman, a thin blonde with hollow eyes. The bidding was immediate and enthusiastic, eventually reaching $50 before a wealthy ranch owner claimed her. The second and third women went quickly too, each fetching between $30 and $40. The fourth woman, older and clearly ill, went for just $20 to a farmer who admitted he mainly needed help with his children. Then only Ellie remained, standing alone on the stage while the crowd's mockery reached a crescendo. "Who'll start the bidding for this one?" Thorne asked, his voice losing some of its enthusiasm. "Come on, gentlemen, starting bid is $20. "I'll give you $5 if you keep her," someone shouted, provoking waves of laughter. $5? I wouldn't take her for free." Thorne was clearly getting uncomfortable, realizing his auction was turning into a disaster. "Come now, surely someone—" "I want the fat one." The voice came from the back of the saloon, deep as thunder and carrying absolute authority. The laughter died instantly. Every head turned to see who had spoken. Garrett, the Grizzly Rhodes, stood in the doorway, and even in a room full of rough men, he was an imposing presence. At 6'9", with a build that looked carved from granite, massive shoulders, arms like tree trunks, a chest and abdomen showing the kind of powerful six-pack musculature that came from years of hard mountain living, he was a legend in the territory. His weathered face was marked with scars framed by dark hair and beard, and his pale blue eyes held an intensity that made most men look away. Garrett was known throughout the region as a man who lived alone on Redemption Ridge, surviving through trapping and hunting, coming to town only a few times a year for supplies. There were stories about his past, whispers about a wife and child lost to fire, about his time as a soldier, about men who tried to rob him and were never seen again. People respected him, feared him, and generally left him alone. "You want her?" Thorne asked, clearly shocked. The fat one?" "I said I want the fat one," Garrett repeated, walking toward the stage with long, deliberate strides. The crowd parted before him like water. "What's the bid?" "Starting bid is $100, Garrett interrupted, pulling a leather pouch from his vest. "Gold, right now. Take it or leave it." The saloon erupted in shocked conversation. $100 was a fortune, enough to buy a horse and saddle, enough to stake a mining claim, enough to live comfortably for 6 months. Why would anyone pay that much for the fat girl nobody wanted? "Sold," Thorne said quickly, before Garrett could change his mind. He snatched the gold coins, counted them, and shoved a piece of paper at Garrett. "She's all yours. Congratulations." Garrett barely glanced at the paper before turning his full attention to Ellie for the first time. His pale blue eyes studied her face with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow wasn't. "Miss Vance," he said, his deep voice surprisingly gentle, "my name is Garrett Rhodes. I live on Redemption Ridge, about 20 miles from here. I'm offering you a place to stay, honest work, and safety from situations like this. You're not my property. You're a person who needs help, and I have the means to provide it. Will you come with me?" Ellie stared at him in shock. She'd expected whoever bought her to treat her like livestock, to demand labor or worse. She hadn't expected this kind of respect, this acknowledgment of her humanity. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you pay so much for me?" "Because watching this auction made me sick," Garrett said bluntly. "Because these people are treating you like garbage, and you deserve better. Because I couldn't stand by and let this continue. Now, are you coming with me or not?" Ellie looked at the jeering crowd, at Silas Thorne counting his gold with greedy satisfaction, at the four walls of the saloon that had just witnessed her complete humiliation. Then she looked back at Garrett, at this imposing stranger who was somehow offering her dignity when no one else would. "Yes," she said quietly, "I'll come with you." Garrett helped her down from the stage, his strong hand steady and surprisingly gentle, and led her toward the door. As they were leaving, someone made the mistake of calling out one final crude comment. "Hey, Grizzly, what are you planning to do with all that woman? Use her to keep warm in winter?" Garrett stopped, turned, and fixed the speaker with a look that could freeze blood. "Her name is Eleanor Vance. You'll show her respect, or you'll answer to me. And trust me, that's not a conversation you want to have." The threat was unmistakable, and no one challenged it. Garrett and Ellie left the Red Dog Saloon in absolute silence, climbing onto his horse, a massive animal bred to carry heavy loads through mountain terrain, and beginning the journey to Redemption Ridge. The ride took most of the night, climbing steadily into the mountains through increasingly rugged and beautiful terrain. Garrett didn't talk much, but what he did say was considerate, warning about difficult sections of trail, making sure Ellie was as comfortable as possible despite the long ride, explaining what she could expect when they reached his cabin. "I need you to understand something," Garrett said as they rode. "When I paid that $100, I wasn't buying you. You can't buy a person. What I did was pay to get you out of that situation. You're free to leave whenever you want. But I'm offering you a place to stay, work if you're willing to do it, and safety. That's all. No expectations beyond that. Understood?" "Understood," Ellie whispered, though she could barely process what he was saying. No one had ever treated her with this kind of consideration. Garrett's cabin appeared as dawn broke, a substantial log structure built into a rocky outcropping with stunning views of the surrounding peaks. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly well maintained for a bachelor's dwelling. Clean, organized, with handmade furniture and actual glass windows. "The bedroom is yours," Garrett said, gesturing to a door at the back of the cabin. "I sleep in the loft. There's a lock on your door if you want to use it. You should use it, at least until you're comfortable here. The kitchen is well stocked. Help yourself to whatever you need." He paused at the door. "I'm going to check my trap lines. I'll be back this evening. Rest, eat, explore if you want. You're safe here, Ellie. That's my promise to you." After he left, Ellie explored her new home with growing amazement. The cabin was comfortable and well supplied. The bedroom was clean and actually had a real bed with blankets. There was food in the kitchen, real food, not the scraps she'd been living on at the charity house. For the first time in months, Ellie felt like she might actually be safe. Over the following weeks, Ellie and Garrett fell into an easy routine. She helped with cooking, cleaning, and managing the household, while Garrett handled the heavier work of trapping, hunting, and maintaining the property. But what surprised Ellie most was how Garrett treated her, with consistent respect, never commenting on her size, never making her feel inadequate or ashamed. More than that, he actually talked to her. In the evenings after work, they would sit by the fire and share stories about their pasts. Garrett spoke reluctantly about his wife Sarah and their infant son Michael, who had died in a cabin fire 7 years ago while Garrett was away on a hunting trip. "I came back to find nothing but ashes," Garrett said, his voice rough with old pain. The cabin had burned to the ground. Sarah and Michael were gone. I blamed myself, thought I should have been there, should have protected them somehow. After that, I couldn't stand to be around people anymore. Couldn't stand the pity, the memories. So I came to these mountains and built this place. Been alone ever since." His pale blue eyes fixed on Ellie. "When I saw you standing on that stage tonight, being mocked by that crowd, I saw Sarah. People used to mock her too because she was heavy-set like you. She'd endure it with her head high, but I could see how much it hurt her. I couldn't save her from the fire, but I could save you from that auction. That's why I paid the money, Ellie. That's the whole reason." Ellie felt tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry about Sarah and Michael, and thank you for seeing me as worth saving." "You are worth saving," Garrett said firmly. "More than that, you're worth valuing, and I'm going to keep proving that to you until you believe it yourself." As the weeks turned into months, something shifted between them. The practical arrangement evolved into genuine friendship, and then gradually into something deeper. Ellie found herself falling in love with Garrett, his unexpected gentleness, his absolute respect for her, his ability to see her as a complete person rather than just a body to be judged. And Garrett found himself falling in love with Ellie's intelligence, her kindness, her capacity to find joy despite years of cruelty, and yes, even her substantial physical presence, which he found comforting and real in ways he hadn't expected. Their developing relationship was tested when Silas Thorne appeared at the cabin 4 months after the auction, bringing trouble in the form of 5 armed men. "There she is!" Thorne called out as Ellie emerged from the cabin. "My property! Rhodes, you stole her from that auction without proper payment." "I paid you $100 in gold," Garrett said coldly, emerging from the barn with his rifle. In front of witnesses, the transaction was legitimate. "The transaction was invalid," Thorne claimed. "You interfered with a legal proceeding. That girl belongs to me now, and I'm here to take her back. She owes me labor for the money you paid, labor she hasn't provided." "I'm not going back with you," Ellie said, her voice shaking but determined. She'd spent 4 months discovering her own worth, her own capabilities. She wasn't going back to being treated like property. "You don't have a choice," Thorne said, gesturing to his armed men. "Boys, grab her." Garrett's rifle came up instantly, aimed directly at Thorne's chest. "Nobody touches her. Not you, not your men, not anyone. Ellie stays here because she chooses to stay here, and anyone who tries to take her by force will die on this mountain. That's not a threat. That's a promise." The armed men hesitated, clearly not having expected this level of resistance. They looked at Garrett, really looked at his imposing size, his absolute confidence, his clear willingness to kill to protect Ellie, and apparently decided they weren't being paid enough for this fight. But it was Ellie who truly ended the confrontation. She stepped forward, moving to stand beside Garrett, and faced Thorne with a courage she'd never known she possessed. "You're not taking me anywhere," she said clearly. "You treated me like garbage, put me on a stage to be mocked, sold me like livestock. Garrett gave me dignity, gave me respect, gave me a home where I'm valued. I'm staying with him. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. Because he's the first person who ever saw me as worth more than my size. Because he's the man I love." She took Garrett's hand, feeling his fingers close around hers with surprising gentleness. "So, you can leave peacefully, or Garrett can shoot you. Those are your only 2 options." Garrett fired a warning shot over Thorne's head, the crack of the rifle echoing off the mountains. "She's made her choice. Now you make yours. Leave or test whether I'm bluffing. But I promise you, I'm not bluffing." Thorne and his men retreated, clearly unwilling to risk their lives over one woman, no matter how much money was involved. As they disappeared down the mountain trail, Garrett turned to Ellie with unmistakable pride. "You were magnificent," he said. "The way you stood up to him, claimed your own worth. I've never been more proud of anyone." "I learned from you," Ellie said. "You showed me I was worth defending, worth fighting for, worth loving. You gave me back to myself, Garrett." "No," Garrett said, pulling her into his arms. "You found yourself. I just gave you the space and safety to do it. But Ellie, I need you to know what you said to Thorne about loving me. Did you mean it?" "Yes," Ellie said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I love you. I've been falling in love with you for months. I just didn't think someone like you could love someone like me." "Someone like me?" Garrett asked, his scarred face showing a rare smile. "You mean someone rough and broken who lives in isolation because he couldn't bear civilization anymore? Ellie, you brought life and warmth and purpose back to my existence. You turned this cabin from a hiding place into a home. You healed wounds I thought would never close. I love you, not despite your size, but as part of who you are. Strong, capable, real. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you'll have me." "Yes," Ellie said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." They married a month later, with a circuit preacher performing the ceremony and several of Garrett's mountain neighbors, people Ellie had come to know and respect, serving as witnesses. When Garrett slipped the ring onto Ellie's finger and spoke his vows with fierce conviction, she felt the last remnants of shame and worthlessness fall away. Years later, as they sat on their porch watching their 2 children play in the meadow below the cabin, Ellie reflected on the journey that had brought her here. "Do you remember what you said at that auction? 'I want the fat one'? Those words changed my life, Garrett." "I remember wanting to burn that saloon down for how they were treating you," Garrett said honestly. "The mockery, the cruelty, it was unbearable to watch." "You paid $100 for me," Ellie continued. "Everyone thought you were crazy, thought you'd made a terrible mistake. But you told me later it was the best money you ever spent." "It was," Garrett said, pulling her close. "That $100 bought me everything that matters: love, family, home, purpose. You brought me back to life, Ellie. After Sarah and Michael died, I was just existing, hiding from the world. You gave me a reason to actually live again. You're worth more than all the gold in these mountains." As the sun set over Redemption Ridge and their children's laughter filled the evening air, Garrett and Ellie held each other and counted their blessings. What had started with a cruel auction and a desperate transaction had become a love story that proved worth was never determined by size or appearance, but always by character, courage, and the wisdom to recognize genuine value when others saw only what they'd been taught to dismiss. The fat one nobody wanted had become a beloved wife, mother, and partner. The broken mountain man had found healing and purpose, and together they had built a kingdom of love on a ridge that would forever be known as the place where 2 wounded souls found redemption in each other's arms.